All right, so Friday was easy. Friday was driving to Miami, Oklahoma. I think it was a pretty uneventful day.
Yeah.
Saturday we had Weather Center tour, all that good stuff. Radar Research Center as well. Yep, so that was in Norman end, so Weather Center, and then Advanced Radar Research Center was the other tour. The trucks out there are, you know, hodgepodge of organizations use those.
And then, NSSL, the National Weather Center.
Yep. After that, I'll just kind of scroll on the map here. Let's see, where did we go to that night? We went all the way to Pampa that night.
Yeah.
We wanted to go to Elk City, but we got the hotel with the moths in Pampa instead.
Yeah. That was insane.
So for why the choice was Pampa, or why we actually really wanted Elk City instead, Sunday leading up to the trip looked like potentially like a lower end chase day, potentially something decent. As it got closer and closer, there's a huge trend for less and less moisture each day leading up to it. So it went from looking like, hey, it's a pretty good setup, to there's going to be thunderstorms, maybe something very marginal to chase. So that first Sunday chase we did, basically just saw some thunderstorms. Drove out west from Pampa, out towards Dalhart, going southwest of there. You notice on the map up here, not a whole lot of roads. So we passed up through this region, drove down south. We had storms, you know, sitting out here almost in the road void. None of the storms were particularly impressive, so it's really marginal for shear. A little bit of instability, both on the lower end. We were going out to check it out, not too far away, like a couple hours from the hotel, seeing if maybe we'll get some structure on the first day. Where we stopped and had, you know, I guess our first lightning strikes, first thunder of the trip, was on this road west of Channing here. So we were looking at the storms out in this area. For the most part, very glaciated storms. So we're seeing, you know, the clouds go up, immediately becoming glaciated. Your typical pulse thunderstorms type of scenario, so low peak, low shear. We were sticking with those for a little bit, then we felt the cold outflow from them. So there were more storms popping up further back to the west, but if you picture what was happening, we had these storms closer to us near Channing. That cold outflow was going out in all directions, and then further in the distance to the west, even further behind the cold air, we had some other thunderstorms going up, so that's why we didn't bother to take a look at that. So they were, you know, well behind the cold air, which was already inhibiting the thunderstorm growth.
Sorry, what day was this again?
Sunday. Yeah. So at that time, you know, this kind of looked like the show was over. Pretty minor show to begin with. There were some cells popping to the east, a little bit more into the warmer air, also back towards the direction of the hotel we had for the night. So we opted to just, you know, let those go out to the west. They were in a pretty poor environment. Said, you know, let's see if anything happens with this. If not, we're basically on the way back to our hotel. So we're driving along, you know, cells went up, they did the same thing. So you had short-lived thunderstorms, pulse storms, quickly become glaciated and dissipated. And then drove back to Pampa again for the night. I'll scroll the map over for us. And we switched up hotels.
Yeah.
Trying to have one without the moths. and I think you got a cockroach was that in your room?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got a cockroach in your room instead of...
That's a trick. Hey, at least they're not as aerial as the moths. We've taken care of the aerial forces, but the ground forces run strong.
It's like I prefer the flying, but I don't know, the number of moths was so high compared to your one cockroach that you have.
Oh yeah.
At least that one room had so many moths.
You should have seen the gym area. It was wild.
Oh my god.
I was having trouble getting my notes up. Saturday.
So Saturday started in Miami, Oklahoma. Went to the Weather Center for the tour. So saw, you know, tour of the Weather Center building, tour of Storm Prediction Center. Got to see how they like construct or draw up a watch there. So they didn't issue, but they brought it up to the point of clicking the button for the fake Northern Illinois watch, just to show us how it all works.
Really hoping it's
After that, then the National Weather Service office for Norman area, they gave us a little bit of rundown of what they do, how they work in collaboration with SPC. After that point, went outside, went to Advanced Radar Research Center, and got a really nice tour there, so saw all sorts of cool stuff.
What was it called?
Advanced Radar Research Center. ARRC.
When did that?
ARRC.
That weird soundproof chamber that I was really
Oh, the
anxious-
anechoic chamber. Yeah, that was really cool.
and really anxious not to trip and fall in.
So were all of we.
Was I almost fell.
We were just watching that little plank and like, please don't anyone trip and fall down in here.
I almost fell. Almost.
And the book, Advanced Research.
Advanced Radar Research
Radar
Center.
Research Center. Sorry, it's a little hard to read.
It's a weird acronym too, like the ARRC. Don't forget Rudy's was for lunch before that. Always gotta have the good food in there.
Really dry brisket.
You didn't get moist?
They didn't offer a moist sandwich.
There's brisket moist though.
Yeah, but they didn't offer.
You have to say it.
You get to say it.
What the god?
I say brisket moist, like those are their choices. They have
Well, like they
brisket,
didn't have it
brisket moist.
listed under their sandwiches. I didn't know why they had.
You say brisket moist.
I don't know. Why did they make the distinction?
make
Why not
it
just
a
make
trip,
all of
right?
their brisket moist?
Because some people don't like the brisket
Well, they're
moist.
wrong.
What that was kind of dry.
It's just like people that order a steak. Well done.
Hey, what was your sandwich? Because they give you bread for free there too.
Yeah, it was just I just asked for a brisket sandwich because they were out of pulled pork. And also, they were out of pulled pork. What barbecue place runs out of pulled pork?
Oh, good one.
That's
So for next time, now you know.
Yeah.
Brisket moist and bread is free.
Yeah.
So you can just ask them and be like, give me 6 slices of bread or however much you want.
Yeah. I'm gonna be doing jujitsu next year.
You want this paper to
Yeah.
include like what we had for food and everything like that?
No, I'm just giving you as much detail as you want to
Oh,
work
okay.
with.
Okay.
I was gonna say like.
It is a bad.
So the 5 pages can be like a broad overview. It can be like your favorite chase. I expect a lot of people will be that nighttime chase that we had.
Yeah.
It's like seeing a big supercell at sunset. Collision Day was probably that's a good one too.
Are you okay about us writing?
I guess me or Lodge
Writing about that? Paul's
Go,
like,
go.
we were right underneath.
We were literally 400 meters from the circulation.
I'm 10 feet from it.
My head is still bumping from the hail.
All good on Sunday?
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, so I'll zoom out the map for Monday.
Channing, Oklahoma, right? Or was that Texas?
Yeah, we were west of Channing for the storms on Sunday. Channing, Texas.
Oh,
Yeah.
Texas, right?
And I'll give you you can be oddly specific. It was Texas 767 if you want the road name. Do you want to know the exact location on Texas? on Texas 767.
How fast were we driving?
We were sitting still on the right side of the road.
See the road again?
The vans were facing west and we were looking north.
Where did Kirk go?
All around.
767.
767. So this road right here.
Yeah. I see that. It's nice to do.
You know, it's not about the time you do.
Not a lot of neighborhoods out west.
Like,
Not a lot of neighborhoods.
Oh, yeah.
Out west.
Yeah.
It's just
If you get the Texas farm roads are essentially all paved.
Yeah.
So if you see like farm whatever, it's a good road. Yeah. Well, FTM's just farms to market.
Oh. What's that thing?
Radio.
A lot of road signs I've seen to say that.
Those might be that might be a shorter farm to market, but I'm just speculating on that. We're out of Texas. I can't look at this. I can't look at the signs to verify. Can't look at the signs to verify at this point. So one of the other reasons that we were picking Pampa was, Sunday was like a very low end potential chase, but Monday was also expected to be in this area. For Monday, there were a couple of targets, which is why we had Pampa for the night. One was more up in the far northeast panhandle into southern Kansas, and then the other target was further down south for a potential chase. Actually, that's a little bit too far east. Let me redraw that circle for you. Somewhere out in like this general region. In between, didn't look like a whole lot, so these were 2 different setups. To the north, this is where we had the MCV. So you're looking at near the MCV in the south side of it. To the south was more of, daytime heating, subtle little shortwave. You have a little bit of terrain. Since we were so, pulled aloft for the most part, very little capping. This was just a broad area where thunderstorm development was expected. Up here was a little bit more focused with the MCV. Now, something with chasing, and it might not be, sometimes it's hard to communicate, might not be entirely clear, like what our thought process is up front or what's going on. But we're not really certain of where we're going. So it may seem like that sometimes, like we've got it all planned out. That's absolutely not true. We're planning out for different scenarios that might happen, but we're not sure which one's going to be best to chase. We're not sure if our forecast is even right. We're not sure if our decision making is going to be right. So we're just trying to keep the options open as long as possible and try to pick what seems to be the best on the information we have. So for Monday, my preferred target the night before was actually up here. Even the morning of, this was for my forecast, I thought up north, northern panhandle into southwest Kansas was the best target, even up to, I'd say, about lunchtime that day. So we were hanging out in Pampa. I thought for sure we were going up in this direction, towards the MCV, towards the south side of the MCV.
Was that the morning that we did the first hand analysis?
Yeah.
First of two.
Now, even with that said, so I thought this was going to be the best spot, kind of locked in on it from the night before and the morning. We didn't drive up there because I knew further south was a secondary target. I didn't think it was as good as this one. But there was no reason to leave. This was only an hour and a half away. So I was going to buy more time to see what actually ends up happening. So I thought we were chasing up here. This I thought was secondary, not as good. But we're just going to sit in the middle, have lunch, wait for more observations to come in, see how the afternoon plays out. As that was happening, after buying some more time, this area up to the north was taking a little bit longer to clear out, so it's staying cooler up there. That was pushing back when convective initiation would be, so the storms would be forming up north much later in the day than initially expected. So the initial target that I had up here was more of a low-level Cape surface vorticity type chase, where maybe you're getting more of like a landspout risk for tornadoes with your early storms. You're also getting some enhanced shear from the MCV. But it wasn't working out that way. It was working out much slower than expected initially. So by kind of the end of lunchtime, we were in that park, throwing the football around, killing time. Up here looked like it was going to be more towards 0Z about 7 p.m. before storms would really take off. Where initially last night, night before and that morning, I was thinking this would be like a 2 or 3 p.m. show. We'd go up here, have 6 hours of storms before it gets dark out, and our chase would be done. When this was looking more like 0Z, 7 p.m., well, now you're only down to about an hour and a half of daylight for the chase. For that landspout potential, 0 to 3 Cape is typically going to be maximized earlier in the day, during your peak heating, a little bit after your peak heating. If the storms are waiting till 0Z to form, now you're starting to get into your temperature inversion, where it's cooling first near the ground. So you're actually going to lose some of that low-level instability. So because of that, well, the northern target wasn't going as I expected, so this was not panning out like I thought it would. Looking down to the south, we had an agitated cumulus field already developing by about 2 p.m. So between the two, well, down here looked like it was pretty imminent. Maybe an hour or two we're going to have storms. Up here was looking like, well, now it's a 3 or 4 hour wait, and the setup I actually wanted to chase didn't exist anymore. There wasn't that really strong potential for landspout tornadoes early on with that setup. So that was when we worked our way down south, and I'll show you on the roads here.
So those cumulus clouds were forming around what time?
1-2 p.m. You already saw cumulus, and it was a broad area, so that was always the knock on the southern target. There wasn't really a clear focus for where the storms might form. Up to the north was, well, it's associated with the MCV. Down here was, well, it's just daytime heating, maybe some subtle terrain influences, maybe a subtle shortwave, but it was a broader area where for this chase, you're going to have a bunch of storms all over and you have to try to pick the best one. A lot of times that one tends to just be, are you lucky or not with your selection? So you can make more skillful selections of a storm, but if you have a broad area, there's going to be a lot of luck involved. Those, if possible, I tend to try to avoid with chasing, where you're not always going to be lucky. We fortunately were on this trip with some of the things that happen on our days. But if you can have a more clear focus, that's going to really increase your chances of having a good chase. So by about 2 p.m. or so, even though this was original target up here, we're ruling this out. Storms are going to form too late in the day. As a general rule, it's going to be very tough to chase after it's dark out. We had a couple exceptions this trip, but those are generally few and far in between, where you can have a road network and visibility to support that. So northern target's out. We start moving down towards our southern target here. So we headed out of Pampa, down through Panhandle, down towards the interstate. We did the crossed over here, did the VW ranch, if you remember that, our little,
Bug ranch.
yeah, the bug ranch.
Yeah,
VW
where we
bug
got
ranch.
we got the board games that still occupy that bay.
Got the little, the little tourist trap stuff there. At the bug ranch, we were seeing pretty robust cumulus go up. But one of the knocks on it was you saw they would go up, either become glaciated quickly or really narrow out as the cumulus clouds were rising, so they're getting a lot of entrainment of drier air around them. Updrafts weren't particularly robust, so it was a good sign for being 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but certainly not ready just yet. But from that vantage point, looking off towards the south, we actually saw, kind of generally out here, a lot more robust cumulus towers going up, but it was over a fairly broad region. At the same time, those towers by us were starting to drift off towards the northeast. But these are the ones visually we were looking at them and like, it doesn't look too great, especially not compared to the ones down here. So that's why we opted to let those drift off towards the north, even though they became blips on radar. We got some, minor thunderstorm activity with them. They weren't as explosive in their development. So that's where we said, okay, we're going to rule out this area right by I-40. And now we're going to turn our focus down further to the south. And this is where the decision making started coming in more on the road network side of things. So we've got this broad area elongated west to east. Somewhere in here it looks like we're going to have thunderstorms form, likely multiple storms. The environment this day was supportive of supercells. So it was, again, on the lower end. You had, I think Cape probably 1 to 2,000 for the most part. Wind shear were like 20, 30 knots, maybe a little bit better at times. And at the same time, you're getting storms all over the place. So very weakly capped, lots of cells, lots of mergers, lots of storms interfering with one another. And for the most part, following that cumulus field, we saw they were moving off from the west towards the east. So that right away, we're up here towards Claude. Well, we're not going to go back in this direction because these storms, if they form, are going to be moving towards us, towards the east. So you could rule off right away and say, well, we don't need to worry about driving back over here. This is going to come to us if it turns into something good. The next question was, we have the canyon in between our main roads here. So if you heard David and me, we were talking about trying to come up with a strategy for, well, where should we cross the canyon? In between, there's a very big road gap, so you don't want to get stuck on the wrong side of the canyon. Say you went due south out of Claude and the best storm popped up over here. Well, you either have to backtrack and do this really long drive to get ahead of it, or you're going to have to go west of it and then try to dip way down here to catch up. So we were trying to avoid scenarios like that. Given the west to east motions, I'll scroll the map down a little bit. We opted to go towards Clarendon first, and then head down this way. So we're going to cross the canyon on Highway 70. And out of Highway 70 we saw, well, if some of the storms further west form, we've got this road that goes right towards Silverton. The whole time we're driving down, we'll actually be able to see in the distance off towards our west what these towers look like visually to see if that's maybe the storm we want to chase. At the same time, we had some cells over on the east side of this road, so we had kind of an area of interest over here where stuff was popping up. Another area of interest over here. We can keep an eye on both of them as we're driving, so this is visually. Of course, we're still checking radar and all of that, but visually we can look and see which one of these clusters turns out to be something better as we're heading down southbound. So with the view of this one, well, if this took off, we could actually cut over Lakeview, Memphis, get in front of it. Especially since we're early on in the storms, it would be no worry driving through the precipitation of our developing storm. We wouldn't have a hail risk or anything like that to worry about. Or we could even continue down further south, keeping an eye on both. And if at that point this looked good, we'd come up basically right on the southeast side of it, being a good vantage point. While driving down, the ones off towards our southeast were generally looking fairly glaciated, so we saw them go up pretty good, got glaciated, looked like they were struggling a little bit, wasn't completely focused. Where the ones off towards our west began intensifying pretty rapidly, so we saw a nice sharp anvil with those and decided, hey, this is going to be the storm we're going after. So we actually took this route right through the Silverton. And I should point out, even before some of the things I mentioned, you're always looking for the way out before you put yourself in that position. So when we're thinking of, hey, if this storm becomes good, it's tracking eastbound, we're approaching it this way, If we don't make it in time, we can drop down south on 70 to get out of the way. We can go east here, south there, southeast here. So we have all these escape routes. Say if the storm really exploded and beat us to this intersection. When we actually were heading over towards Silverton, we weren't going to do this unless we were 100% confident we'd beat the storm to the spot. If we beat the storm here, well, we had the southeast option, and then off of that, we had another south option, east option. Plenty of ways to get out of the path of that storm if needed. So our initial storm, as we were right near this Caprock Canyon State Park, when we came out of like that really rugged terrain, saw the wall cloud over the road in the distance. That was right around Silverton here. With that storm, we saw it slow down quite a bit. It started deviating its motion to the right, so we had our right moving supercell. This was, again, within really a messy convective scenario, so there was all sorts of cells all over the place. But this one seemed to be the most established, so visually it looked the best, sharpest anvil, most explosive updraft. On radar looked the best as well, so we had higher echo top, strong reflectivity core with it. So at this point we were actually in pretty good shape if that storm was going to do something. It started drifting more towards the southeast. You'll notice the road network, very favorable for chasing a storm with that motion. So once we were going southbound on this 207, we had a couple times where it's like pulled off onto some of those secondary roads just to have a quiet spot to get out, take pictures, that sort of thing.
What's the road? Sorry.
207 southbound. Now at the same time here, one of the northern storms had a nice looking wall cloud, and that's always something that's tough. Where the further away you get from storms, the lower everything looks as far as features. So it looked like we had this ground scraping wall cloud, but it was really like 40 miles to the north, and that always plays tricks with you. Where the further away you get, the lower features look, where it's like, well, should we really be on that storm off towards the north? Well, no, it's 40 miles away, so that ground scraping wall cloud and terrain is really quite a bit higher than what it looked like to us. So we were on this storm for a bit, and again, since we're in the marginal environment, we had somewhat of a pulse behavior to a lot of these, even to supercells that day. So the storm was fluctuating in intensity. We were creeping south with it, down towards Foydata. We actually cut over towards Lockney before going all the way down towards Foydata, so we were kind of going through this path here. And as we were sticking with it, we saw some cell mergers, so I think some of you have time lapses where you see those precipitation cores going into it. Some of those were constructive, where you saw a pulse up of intensity. Some of them were more destructive, where you saw a little bit of weakening after the mergers. While all this was going down, another storm had formed further off towards the southwest. In these messier scenarios, generally the southernmost storms tend to do best. They're going to be closest to the good moisture. They're going to have the least interference with the storms around them. Not a hard and fast rule. Anything can happen, like which we saw on, which day was that? On Wednesday. We were not with the southernmost storms, and we had really favorable things happen with the merger. But that tends to be more dumb luck for that position. That would be like a lower probability of getting something like that to happen. So with this going on, we actually had probably one of our better vantage points earlier in the trip, where we were stopped here generally around Lockney. Off towards the northwest, we saw the wall cloud of our initial storm. We were starting to see some striations and structure with it. And down towards the southwest, we didn't see the structure yet, but we were close to this storm, so we saw the big dumping of the precip core. And we were positioned between the two, so we were looking northwest at our original storm, looking southwest at the new storm that we figured would get better. But we were holding our ground. Since the northwest storm had good structure, everyone got out, taking pictures, that sort of thing.
That was the lower wall cloud?
Yep. And while that was going on, we were keeping tabs on this, just making sure we can beat this down on our limited paved options by the time we leave. So this was interesting. We still want to look at it, but we know we have to leave to get down here and be ahead of that storm when we finally make that decision. So we loop down after finally saying, okay, this has moved far enough. We got to get on the southern storm in good position. Drop down through Lockney. General idea of, hey, we're heading towards this Petersburg area. We had this, at this point it was more of like a developing supercell, eventually became a supercell. And I'll just sketch a very poorly drawn reflectivity compared to what it really looked like, but just to give you a schematic there. But this is what we were anticipating. So we saw a developing supercell here. Looked like it's drifting off towards the southeast. If you see the white lines on here, these are the paved road options. So we're actually off towards the northeast of this storm. We need to make sure we're far enough out ahead. Anywhere in here, you're going to get blinded by the precipitation. You don't want to be approaching a storm that way. So we were just making sure, as this is drifting southeast, that we're going to beat it to Petersburg. That's essentially the plan. So on that drive down towards Petersburg, that was where we saw the the much better wall cloud. Bless you. Bless you.
Always come in pairs.
So we saw our much better wall cloud generated around here. That was at that power substation where we had a little bit of a mud delay. A little bit of a soft ground there.
That was in Petersburg, or
Northeast of Petersburg. So yeah, northeast of Petersburg by that power
The
substation.
van got stuck in the mud as well.
Bless you.
I also remember when one of the vans got stuck in the mud to the substation.
Yeah, so we had our good viewing point, slow moving storm, we're like 10 miles away or so. Fortunately not too big of a deal, just getting this one, van 2 pushed out real quick. But, so keeping an eye on that as it's drifting towards the southeast. We're in this position here. Well, obviously this is not a spot you want to stay, so this is a spot that's going to be impacted by the hail core of the storm if you were to just linger out there. At the same time, you'd be calculating, well, you could go east and retreat to get out of the path entirely, or if you go down south through Petersburg, as long as you're there far enough in advance, you'll be able to escape either to the south or to the east. Petersburg was a tiny town, so it's not something you'd be worried about with traffic. We actually took advantage of this, figuring it's going to be a longer chase day, and we gassed up in Petersburg. That was a little bit unique, where you're in the prime chasing position while fueling up. So.
Oh, that was where
Yeah, so that was so you saw
the horseshoe.
Yeah, so you saw the horseshoe-shaped updraft. You saw the RFD clear slot was in there. Certainly not an imminent tornado, but you saw the features and signs you'd be looking for to know you're in that right area of the storm. So while we're pumping gas, you're seeing the pretty cool features there, horseshoe-shaped updraft. You can see the RFD where it came through. And this storm was just crawling along there. And then we're gassed up, good to go. So we've got... Oh, there it is.
Oh, there's some.
Let's take a detour. Someone's coming down on a parachute over there. Someone's on a parachute over there.
Oh yeah, the hang glider. Well, not the hang glider, the parrot, whatever.
where's the wind field? The wind farm, there we go. What's this? An anticyclonic.
So this was a cyclonic supercell.
Oh, a cyclonic.
Yeah. Now, when we were at the pump here, you could actually see a little bit of the anticyclonic swirl on the south side of the RFD. So where the RFD is coming through, the north side of it, you'd have the cyclonic rotation, the south side of it, anticyclonic rotation. So you could see that really weakly, where it looked like the sky was spinning the wrong way, so to speak, off towards our north. But that was still, fairly high based. It was quite a weak RFD, where you weren't feeling strong winds or any gusting out of that. But the positive was it's actually relatively warm. So if you have a very cold downdraft that makes the storms outflow dominant, or can make them outflow dominant fairly quickly, even in the marginal environment, the RFD didn't feel particularly cold. So when we were stopped here waiting, we were thinking, oh, well, this is going to hold together a little bit longer. It doesn't seem like it's going to gust out just yet.
in southeasterly motion, and let's say it starts to intensify and kind of get together,
Yep.
and we're in that Petersburg spot, what would be the best bail option, to get out of the mouth?
So it'd be depending on how close it was. So we had a perfectly clear shot slot to the south if we needed to escape in a hurry. So with this storm here, we could go south. This was, I think this is actually a 65 mile per hour road. And we're looking at a storm that was moving along at like 5 miles per hour. So you had a very easy escape to the south if you needed it. Maybe if you were going earlier and you wanted to try to stay in the inflow notch of the supercell, you could have gone east and then south. Going east if the storm was moving too fast, now you're risking getting covered up by the hail core and then potentially in the path of the tornado if you had some kind of an occlusion where it curved off towards the northwest. So for us in that case, since the storm was actually behind us, we could go south. That would actually largely take us out of the position of the potential circulation at the same time. So we dipped south out of here, then worked our way eastward. So the storm was a little disorganized, so we were kind of thinking ahead, going, okay, let's give it some room, see if it gets its act together again. At the same time, stretching to the east, it was actually opening up options for other storms up further to the north and northeast, where, hey, if this storm died out, now we're closer positioned to jump on a new one, since it was more of a pulse activity day, aside from a couple of those longer track supercells. So we ended up, taking the occasional stop, heading out this way. But right about over here, northwest of Crosbyton, our supercell really started to intensify again. That was shortly after those the tractors coming through the narrow roads. Remember, the tractors had a big, I don't know what that was, hanging off the back of them. We had to move a couple times. But we were northwest of Crosbyton over here. That's where we saw, the big RFD surge, all the dust kicking up. You had the little vortex in there. I think Jacob got some pictures of it. I got some pictures. That's one where, what do you want to call things like that? I personally wouldn't call that a tornado just because of how short-lived it was. If you go by definition, it was a rapidly rotating column of air. It was in contact with the ground and a cumulus cloud base above it. So if someone wanted to argue that was a very brief, weak tornado, you could probably reasonably make an argument for it. Inside that downdraft. Now, I wouldn't is more of, if you looked at the downdraft itself, you just had strong northerlies like everywhere in it, so it was pushing north to south, and you had this little vortex inside of it that briefly got tilted up. It wasn't particularly persistent, didn't stay strong near the ground for particularly long. So it's like, is that going to be... So if someone wanted to say, like, hey, it's like the weakest tornado ever, sure, you could make that argument. I would say it's probably more of like a strong gustnado in the downdraft there, just given how everything was moving. It looked like it was largely just part of the downdraft. But that's where you get into the gray areas with, what is exactly a tornado. We have a definition for it, but the definition still has some degree of ambiguity in it, where different people might look at it different ways. Yeah. So the tilting most likely was actually due to the downdraft, tilting it up and back. But it did seem like it was connected to the cloud base above briefly. So that's where the gray area is.
Yeah.
That would be one where, I'm I think a little bit stingier with calling something a tornado, or
For sure.
I'd call that more of a strong gustnado.
It's cool to look at, though.
Cool to look at, exciting to look at, especially from our vantage point, since we had such a clear view at it. By that point, we actually did have a full HP supercell, so you couldn't really see the wall cloud or any of the other features in there. Looking off towards the west, we had the cool striations and structure, but underneath it, we were kind of losing our visual on most of what was going on, just heavy precipitation all over the place. The storm at this point started speeding up a little bit, so we made sure we got south through Crosbyton just to stay out ahead of it as it was tracking down southeast towards us.
This is the same one that had the gustnado?
Yep.
Yeah, and it had the rain shield that screwed it.
So that storm went through Crosbyton, actually took out the power in both Crosbyton and Rowles. So those were, we'll get to that after the fact, but both of these towns lost power for actually a pretty substantial amount of time. So really strong winds. If you remember when we were south of Crosbyton, that's where we're getting into the crosswinds.
We're waiting for that.
The downdraft surge coming out. At this point, if I'll zoom out and show you what was going on.
We're waiting for the hail core to pass, right?
Yeah. So we got down to here. There's that cool field with the yellow flowers, made for good foreground for shooting pictures of that big RFD dust surge coming in with the winds. But about this time, we're seeing, this storm is now most certainly starting to gust out. We're seeing the downdraft get way out ahead of the rest of the storm. And the general environment was not something really conducive to that storm getting its act back together and establishing inflow. At the same time, for hotel options, heading down in this direction, you're very, very limited unless you go way far south. Our next chase day, we expected to be back off towards the northwest, so we didn't want to keep getting pushed way down towards Abilene or something like that for a hotel when we know the next day we're going to have to drive way back up to the northwest, especially with the storm that's starting to gust out. So what we tried to do here was, and let me find it on the map. Where did Crosbyton go? There it is. Notice the roads were fairly sparse out here as well, so you're getting into a pretty rural area, not many road options, especially for a southeast moving storm. You've only got this one south option, separated by about 20 miles or so versus the other south option. So you're getting down by Calgary, really limited in what you could even do if you wanted to stay with that storm. At the same time, we had another cell developing to the southwest of that one. This was something that would be moving over to the east, so that's going to cross over these roads here. You don't want to end up in a situation where you're just driving through precipitation cores, trying to look or follow the original storm, which now you can't see. So our goal or our hope was we could sit far enough south that the core of the storm would pass us off towards the northeast. It would track over this road, leave the hail swath on the road, and then we could shoot back up north behind it on our way to the hotel and hopefully seeing the hail in the road. That was one of those where, well, it was a good idea. It didn't work out in practice. There was just a lot of rain with that hail core. So by the time we came up here, all the hail was already melted. So sometimes that'll happen. Sometimes you'll get, mostly hail or big enough hail to where you can find the hailstones after. With this one, most likely it was smaller hail and a lot of rain. So by the time we were here, 10, 15 minutes later, all the hail was already gone and melted in the water.
So this is the second storm that developed right behind it.
No, this is the original storm. So the second storm behind it passed to our south. So we were sitting in between the two hail cores. So we were right down here, letting our original storm pass to the north while the new storm passed to our south.
Okay, I missed that part. So, storm moved from Crosbyton,
Yep.
the supercell, we're seeing the striations, and then
We went south of it to get out of the path, and we let the original storm, I'll show with my left hand up here. So our original storm went like this across the road. So we stayed to the south of it to avoid the hail core of it. But we couldn't go too much further south because the second storm had formed down there as well.
okay.
So we were sitting, pretty much in between two of these. This was the southeastward moving supercell. This was more of just like an eastward moving cluster of storms, not particularly organized, but did have a hail core with it. So we sat in between. We're hoping to see some hail on the ground driving back north, and it all melted, unfortunately, before we got there. Our hotel for that night was up in Childress. I'll just circle on the map for you for where that is. Let's pick a better color. So we're down in Crosbyton, need to get to Childress. Around it was like 7 p.m. or so at this time. We're again on a higher risk or a higher ceiling type day. 7 p.m. could be where things are just getting started. On more of a pulse storm, weak shear, weak keep type of day with weak capping, so there's just a lot of storms everywhere, competing for one another for that environment. By 7 p.m. this day, things are starting to wind down actually. So you had storms all over the place, but generally too many interactions, too many cold pools out there, leading to a winding down of the activity. So our hope was from Crosbyton. I think we also needed like a bathroom break or something at that point. So we're going to go to the gas station in Crosbyton for the bathroom, and then we can shoot up north this way behind all the storms. We don't want to get caught in the rain out here. So this area east of Lubbock tends to have pretty bad flooding if you have these slow moving storms. So we were just saying, well, we want to stay behind the bulk of the activity and drive up into Childress at a reasonable hour. Well, Crosbyton, the power was out. So then we went west to Rowles and the power was out. Then we tried to go north towards Floydada. That road was flooded. So then we turned around and we found another extension to get us north of the town of Rowles to get around the flooding.
This is all Tuesday morning?
No, still Monday.
Monday.
Monday night still. So at that point we went up towards Floydada, worked our way back. We had, I think, a gas station stopped in there. That was when we had that random noise with the van. I think something got stuck and was like rubbing on the brake pad as we were driving, like a piece of gravel. Then headed up to Childress for the night there with the continuing string of bad luck with hotels. That was the one where we walked in, we saw the business center was out of order, so we would not be able to print maps for the next day. It was brand new, but nothing was plugged in or working yet. No paper, no ink, that sort of thing. That was our Taco Bell dinner night at Childress, and then our wander around Walmart for a bit. So that'll bring us to Tuesday now. So now we're Tuesday morning. So Tuesday morning starting in Childress. This was looking to be, an even better day than the day before. So the day before, for David and me, we thought that overperformed. We actually got pretty persistent HP supercell, had the cool Gustnado spin up in the RFD, got some nice structure with it. The exciting wind, it's always kind of cool seeing the dust getting pushed along with the wind and all that. And fortunately, avoided the flooding before it got worse, so we were able to get back to our hotel at a reasonable hour. If we had continued south with those original storms, it probably would have been 3 or 4 hours to find a way around flooded roads to get back up to where we needed to go. Let's zoom out here. So we're in Childress Tuesday morning. I'll get the little check mark over it for you. So for Tuesday's setup, generally it's a broad area here, western Texas Panhandle we're looking at, maybe a touch into New Mexico as well. This was one of those days where a little bit more ambiguous where the best focus is going to be. We had a dry line out here. There's a forcing mechanism. We also had upslope flow, so this broad area is favored for activity. And again, fairly weak capping. So it's going to be another day with a lot of storms out there, all over the place. Probably forming a little bit on the earlier side. So for our thinking to get out here, we were trying to find where did we think was going to be the best setup along this broader area. Further down towards the south, it looked like there might actually be a little bit stronger capping here, so maybe you're not going to get the best development. Or you'll get some development that goes up, struggles with the cap, and fizzles out. Further towards the north, we seem to be moving away from the best environment out there as far as Sheeran Cape. So we were aiming somewhere kind of dead middle, so we were looking in the morning thinking, okay, we're up in Childress. We're going to head down towards Plainview maybe. If south looks better than expected, we can drop down on the interstate. If due west of there looks good, we'll just continue on. So we were thinking somewhere around Muleshoe for our region. But then, hey, if say north was a surprise and this looked better than we thought it would, we've also got this nice diagonal option up towards Dimmitt on the road network. So we've got all options open heading towards Plainview. We actually left a little bit slower and later, so we kind of took our time heading out there because we actually wanted to see visually, as the cumulus towers are going up, which area looks to be favored, where does it look most robust. So instead of sitting close and kind of agonizing over each cumulus coming up, we were approaching in from the east to the west with the big broad view of everything in front of us, seeing where do these towers look like they're focusing, where does it look like it's going to be best. And what we were seeing was matched up with our expectations. So around this Muleshoe area, we kept seeing persistently the best cumulus towers going up. Still becoming glaciated and dying off, but it did seem like there was a focus around here. So Muleshoe, Farwell, that general region.
What's that town?
Muleshoe. From our Plainview travel stop, that was where we had, all the chaser convergence. We saw the chase vehicles out there, saw some of the radars there at that stop as well. We saw, storms finally starting to root a little bit more. There, you can see them in radar reflectivity becoming more established. Deeper reflectivity cores, visually starting to look a little bit better. So we were heading westbound towards it. Again, this is kind of a fortunate theme for us this trip, but slower moving storms. So even if you don't necessarily have the best approach to it, if they're moving slowly, it's pretty easy to correct for your mistakes. So even if you approached it from a less than ideal angle or less than ideal with the roads you chose, if they're slow moving, you've got time to get around them and get where you need to be. Now heading towards this storm in Muleshoe, we're heading out on 70 here, so Highway 70 westbound. What we were looking at that point was the scenario of, well, if this storm blows up into something good and starts to deviate rightwards. So if you think about bunker storm motion in the morning, if we have a right moving supercell, that would be our estimate for how it's going to move. So we would expect the right moving supercell to be heading down in this direction. And we're coming in west from Plainview, so going westbound out of Plainview. So one of the things we were talking about was, where do we turn south? So we've got this option off of 70 towards Sudan, this option out of Earth, southward towards Amherst. And this was going to be dependent on how quickly the storm blew up. If it blew up really quickly, we might even have had to turn south down here to make sure we're safely out ahead of it for a viewing point. It ended up taking a little bit of a while to get going. As we started heading further and further west, the anvil started blocking out the sun for us so we could see good contrast, we could see the base of the storm. In general, if you can see that storm base, even if you're not in the perfect position, you're not going to need necessarily, for the developing storm, an immediate change in direction for where you're going with your roads. You just want eyes on the base to get a sense of what's going on visually. So we saw that here, kept heading westbound, and eventually dropped down towards Sudan. We set up there for our little time lapse. It started off as an LP storm, so we had the developing LP supercell there. Pretty decent structure, started doing some amadas. Trying to think if anything else interesting happened at that stop there.
Is that where the storm was splitting?
No, it's a different day.
Oh, this is the day of.
Yeah, it's Tuesday. Yeah, it's Tuesday.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because we saw so many storms that were converging in one day, and then the next day we saw them all just split.
Yeah.
up.
So this was kind of a weaker LP supercell developing. We were off towards the east-northeast of it, looking west-southwest at the storm. Sat there, time-lapsing a little bit. It was getting more intense, but not really explosive development. At that point, we dropped south down towards Sudan. And then we're trying to find a really like an uncluttered viewpoint. So there's a lot of wind turbines, that sort of thing out there. So we headed west out of Sudan, down this little road here. I can give you the name of it if you want. Yep, so yeah, Landspout's coming up on this one. So we headed west on this 298 out of Sudan. Had a couple different stops here. Again, we're just generally looking for like the least cluttered view. That was the area where those roads were mostly like that red dirt clay material, so the dirt roads were really not something we wanted to get onto. A lot of them had steep embankments, so to be able to park and be out of the way of any traffic coming through, you couldn't do on a lot of those dirt roads, so that's not always the case, but out there, steep embankments, you don't want to be blocking the road for other chasers, so we actually took a little bit of time. It was like 5-10 minutes or so trying to find a place where we could actually pull off safely, be completely out of the way of the road, and give us a view that wasn't cluttered by, wind turbines, trees, whatnot out there. So I'll zoom back out again. So our storm at this point, I'm sure I did right, here we go. It was out over this broader area. We were out here, west-southwest of Sudan, looking at the storm. Set up once again. I know some people are doing time lapses. One of the things that we felt actually like in person there was the inflow had started increasing a little bit into the storm. But it's still, very high based. Has some decent structure striations, so we're watching that for a while. As it was getting closer, visually not looking quite as great, and we saw more low clouds blocking our view, so as far as like a structure standpoint, it started deteriorating. Quality of the storm as far as an intensity standpoint was staying pretty consistent, but visually not particularly impressive. At that point, another storm had formed up near Farwell up here that was more explosive in development. Now I'll mark both of these off on the map. So we had our original storm generally around Muleshoe area. We had a new storm up by Farwell. This one seemed more explosive for how it developed. And here's just a kind of a fortunate case of road network and also visibility on that day, where we're down here west-southwest of Sudan, and we could actually drive up towards the Farwell storm to get in position if this really blows up and becomes something good. But in doing so, we don't actually even have to leave our Muleshoe storm. So the bases are so high, even on this road, we can see cloud base very well. So we had started, drifting up in this direction. Again, not abandoning this storm, we can still have eyes on the cloud base, eyes on the ground under it. But just in case this one becomes the storm of the day, we've got a clear shot at it very quickly to get in position, perfectly from the southeast as it's drifting down towards us. This is at the point where Jacob noticed like the dust swirling going on underneath it. So we were on this 84 heading northwest, looking out the window, seeing the dust swirl, being like, okay, this is potentially a landspout developing. As that dust swirl is getting more intense, we're like, okay, well, we're not going to leave this. We we noticed a fine line on radar, so there's some sort of boundary down there that the storm was interacting with. So as we pulled off pretty quickly, head of view south, looking at it. I know you got some nice pictures. A lot of people got nice pictures. A little tube dust vortex in there, snaking upwards. From our location, we couldn't confirm if that tube was going all the way up to cloud base. Yeah. So we were seeing, well, was there a needle funnel above? From our vantage point, couldn't confirm that. So we were like, well, possible land spout, don't know for sure. It was kind of weird, which I haven't seen this too much, but if you actually looked at the cloud base, where the funnel came from was a little bit higher up than the cloud base. So we were looking from the north, so we had cloud base like this. To the south of the storm, we had a higher cloud base that the funnel was out. So from our vantage point, we were actually blocked. We couldn't see the
upper
yeah, we couldn't actually see where the funnel and the rotation actually was under the clouds.
Yeah.
But if you were off to the southwest of it, you would have been able to see that actual cloud-based rotation with the dust swirl down. Yeah, and someone did get a picture, and I'm glad for that, because that would have been one of those where you're always wondering, well, that was an intense dust swirl. You got the little tube going up, and you're like, but did it actually make it there? Well, fortunately, someone was over on the other side, so we know it did make it all the way up.
One of them got the cinnamon bun, and the other got the needle.
The little needle up there, yeah. So once that started happening, we're actually are transitioning mode for chasing. So on land spout days, often southwest of storms gives you a better view of what happened, and that's what happened with the people down here. So the best vantage point or views of that was from southwest of the storm. If you think about how the storm's being sheared, the precipitation, the cloud debris is all getting pushed northeast of it, the east of it. So if you're on the backside, you have the most clear view of that updraft itself. Again, we're not talking about like a classic supercell with like a big RFD that would block that side. We're just talking about these cumulus towers going up, getting sheared off towards the east. So the southwest side actually offers a pretty good vantage point for land spouts. Whereas if it was a traditional supercell, you wouldn't want to be over there. You're generally going to have your view blocked.
What would the best place be for that supercell? Would it be just more east?
For this one?
Southeast?
So if you
it was a
were,
classic supercell.
so southeast if this is classic.
Yeah.
But when it became the land spout type setup, though, now you're like, we got to get kind of more into the clear air on the southwest side of it to see the best view. So that's what we did. We did like transition mode. So this is how quickly things can change on the fly. We were on this road to keep our options open for this storm if it blew up, while still keeping an eye in here. While keeping an eye in here, we saw the land spout forming. At that point, we then tried to drop into more of a land spout chase position, where you'll notice when we were on some of those less major roads, we were south of the updraft, trying to be in the area where those dust swirls would be forming, so we could actually see, do they connect all the way up to cloud base? Something you wouldn't be able to do from like the traditional supercell viewing position, so you're more south, even southwest of some of those storms at times. All the while, keeping an eye on everything else. We played around with that for probably an hour or so. With land spout tornadoes, if you're trying to view those, you generally have to catch them early. Once you have a lot of precipitation, that rain cooled air pushes outwards, limits the low level instability, limits that stretching of vorticity you'll get. So if you're ever going out to chase the land spout setup, you got to be out there really early. You actually want to be there right when those cumulus towers are going out, but be in close proximity to them. Once you're more established with storms, that risk tends to go down quite a bit, just because of the rain cooled outflow going outwards.
So how common are these?
So define common.
I guess like a lot of storms that we're chasing, are really developed.
Yeah.
They have been producing.
How can you give me common? I need like a number to go with it. Like what would common mean to you in that number per year?
Oh, I don't know. I would say maybe half of the supercells that develop.
So then no, so not that common. Okay. It would be more of if you said like 50 to 100 tornadoes per year that way, sure, that would be reasonable.
Okay.
But as far as supercells, you'd still be talking probably, like under 5%, honestly, for how many times that would happen. So,
And just because you were saying, during early development that's
Yeah.
where you want to be, and typically it's like we're wanting to see the full structure of the tornadoes, wall clouds. I didn't know if this was something that's like, every once in a while it'll kick them up. If you're in an area of land that's
yeah, if you got
pretty dry, dusty and stuff like
and you've
that.
got the boundary, yeah, so it'd be common in the sense of it happens every year, but very uncommon if you're going by like, is this storm going to do it?
So it's not like, oh, well, this is developing. Let's see if we
so usually you wouldn't try to do that.
Okay.
But say you were, a storm like this forming right near the dry line, it's dusty underneath, there's low level instability, that's going to up your chances.
Okay.
So that's why when we were actually considering, so we thought this was going to be our target storm actually for a brief while. But we were like, well, let's not give up on this one because that boundary's there. So we're going to keep eyes on the base, even though we're planning on leaving the storm, we're still going to look at it. And that's when we got the land spout. Then we switched over to a land spout mode, chased it for a while, but then you got more and more storms developing, precipitation was all over the place. Then we're transitioning back to, okay, well, land spout risk looks like it's pretty much done at that point. So what's going to come next? We have missile storms all over. They were kind of higher base too for the most part, if you remember that day. Then we transitioned to like a hail. Yeah, like we're like, well, let's find some good hail to look at. And at that point we're looking around finding, well, is there a hail core that's going to cross the road favorably to where we can be really close to it and then come in right behind it after it crosses over a highway?
We go south. We go northwest. Went to Spade.
Yep. So at that point we had this big left split we saw pop up. So big hail core down here, cruising off towards generally the north-northeast.
Is it off the land spout cell, or that was the?
So this is off a different cell, so a cell further down to the south of it. So our original land spout cell was kind of like fizzling out, like it was still going, but it had lost its structure, lost its land spout risk. It also wasn't really a big hail producer. So we saw some storms down to further to the south. That was one of the areas where we thought it was a little bit more capped, but later on the storms actually did form there. And one of those left splits was coming up towards the north. We were up here, I'll show you like where our arrow is. So we were driving this way, and we had a left split down here heading this way. The left split really looked like it was pushing off fairly quickly, so this was not the slower moving storms we had seen before. So our first thought was, well, if we just head down 84, is it possible to like beat it and find a car wash or a gas station to hide under and watch the hail in person? Would we stop here and let it cross this road and try to come behind it? Both of those seemed like a stretch for how fast the storm was moving, how far we needed to drive. So we opted for more rural roads. So this was still a paved road heading towards Spade, but we don't have big towns along it. There weren't really many chasers out there to worry about. So it was a lot more like in your control for where you're stopping, how fast you're going. So our plan was to let the storm and that hail core, I'll just kind of show like the swath where it would be. Let the storm do this. At the same time, we drive up right to the periphery of it. So we're out of the path of it getting closer, off towards the right-hand side, so out my window. We can see the hail core itself and the storm itself moving this way, so we have a visual on it to go along with the radar data. And we're going to let it pass over the road. Wrong arrow there, sorry about that. Turn my head too much. We're on this road here.
I was wondering. Yeah.
So we're going to stop just short of where it crosses the road. And that way we can see it crossing and get in right after it. So like the day before, where it was like 20 minutes later when we drove through and the hail melted, this was only going to be a few minutes after. And honestly, we were actually going to drive into it until the hail got too big. That was the other thing, where right at the periphery, we're going to drive in very slowly, maybe see some like pea-size, nickel-size, maybe even up the quarters. If it gets too big, we're going to stop there, let the bulk of the core pass us by.
So basically went for the hailstorm for the hail.
Yeah.
Went for it.
So yeah, we wanted to see the hail not big enough to damage the vehicle. So right at the far western periphery of this hail crossing the road.
Alright, so it's really small for me to read. What?
That's a Spade right there. Spade, Texas.
What's the the route?
The route, I gotta zoom in for that one.
Southeast then. You got the red arrow.
Oh, that was 84 where we went southeast. And then Spade itself was on Texas 54. Let's see if I can match that arrow again. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Southeast down to 84.
Yep.
Then
Eastbound on 54. So this was the point, right around Spade, a little bit past Spade, where we kept, we'd creep into the hail. Okay, we'd get big enough. Okay, we're going to stop and wait. We don't want too big hitting the vans. And then creeping forward a little bit, looking on the side of the road to see if we could find some of those bigger hailstones. I think the biggest we found was like a lot of 1.75 inch seemed to be the consensus, where we had those handfuls, like ping pong ball size, maybe golf ball size to some degree. We were a little bit sad because the hail core had weakened before it crossed here, so we were hoping, hey, we're going to see some like baseballs or tennis balls out here. They probably dumped them out in no man's land, so out like in between the road network here. But still, that's pretty cool seeing a lot of these ping pong ball, golf ball sized hailstones there. Let it pass by, and then we're like, okay, let's cruise a little further east. At this point, we saw way off towards the east-northeast a boundary there with a storm developing stationary right near it. So that was like right away, hey, this looks like something we want to get on. It's still young and developing, but it's out ahead of everything else. So way back to the west, there were just storms everywhere, dozens of storms going on. But this was one way out ahead, not much interfering with it, in that stationary boundary right nearby. But in between, there and the future place, it was just a blip at that point. It was more like, hey, if this forms here, this would be a good storm to get on. Our hail core picked up again. So when we were going, so we crossed through here, and then had this northbound up towards the Cotton Center area. We're like, hey, let's follow the hail core again. So we had that little second encounter with it, that was where it was interesting. You had that really dense hail, so it wasn't particularly big, but it was very hard. So you had like the very hard, smaller pellets, like nickel size for the most part. Watched that, sat in a little bit south of Cotton Center, let the core go off. And then you probably heard us, if you're in Van 1, heard us talking about how do we cross I-27 here. So there's not a lot of these interstate crossings with the back roads. And this one was a little bit weird, where you had like double go up a ramp around, like that sort of thing to cross it, if you wanted to stay on pavement with your crossing. So we did that east of Cotton Center here. Then we had our ghost train where the rail crossing malfunctioned. So that came down, looked in both directions. There was no train for 5 miles. We actually saw cars going over the other crossing, so something had malfunctioned with the crossing there briefly, slowing us down. Then headed further eastbound, and at this point we were totally locked onto our storm over by Floydada.
The boundary.
So we saw the boundary there, saw the storm going up. We're coming in from this area back by Cotton Center. We actually did find, so it'll be tough to show on here, but we found paved roads that weave through this open area. So the white ones here are the more main roads, paved for sure. We found some paved back roads to get us through this gap, more direct en route towards Floydada. That storm, fortunately for us, the theme of the trip was just sitting there. So it's growing bigger and bigger just to the north of Floydada. So we're approaching it from the west. We actually had a really nice view of that storm as we're coming up to it. So we're starting to see the striations, the wall cloud. And right about, I'll zoom in some more, or I'll try to zoom in. So we were approaching with this trajectory. When we were back here, actually north of Petersburg, this is when we're planning out all of our escapes from further east. So we're saying, well, if the storm keeps taking off and it turns into a right-moving supercell, which roads can we get on and safely get out of the way of the storm? It really turns into something good. As we're getting closer and closer, we're really starting to time, do we have enough time to actually get in there? So we have this south road over here, this south road, and our storm and our circulation is essentially like right about here. So driving up from the southwest, we had actually a beautiful view of the wall cloud, all the striations up above it with the mesocyclone coming in. And at this point we're thinking, well, it looks like we can actually get pretty close to it. There's essentially no precipitation on the backside of the storm. Perfect view.